Tonight, an ABC News special edition, President Biden's historic decision to withdraw from the race for the White House, ending his campaign for a second term. The president giving his full endorsement to Vice President Kamala Harris. Tonight, former President Donald Trump and the Republican Party already going after the vice president. Our special edition begins now.
Tonight, President Biden stands down. The race for the White House. The president's historic decision to withdraw from the race against Donald Trump. Pressure mounting for weeks following his poor performance at the debate. The floodgates opening, with more Democrats calling on him to drop out. Vice President Kamala Harris now in the spotlight. What will Democrats do now? Will they rally behind her or take their fight to the Democratic National Convention 29 days away? Donald Trump and the Republican Party already on the attack. How will American voters respond? This is an ABC News special. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good evening, and we are coming on the air tonight with breaking news in the race for the White House. The Democratic campaign turned upside down. President Biden on this Sunday dropping out of the race for president, ending his campaign, bowing to tremendous pressure growing in recent weeks from members of his own party to pass the torch to a younger generation of leaders. President Biden making his decision in the last 24 hours, releasing a letter earlier today to my fellow Americans. Biden calling being president, quote, the greatest honor of my life. The president goes on to reveal it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down. The president facing growing calls to withdraw following his difficult debate performance against Donald Trump. That was 24 days ago now. The president had called it a bad night. He said he was exhausted. Then we learned in recent days he has COVID. We saw him moving slowly, getting off Air Force One. He went into isolation at his home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. He did hold multiple Zoom calls, we have learned, with members of his family over the weekend, supporting him in whatever decision he came up with, what was best for the country. President Biden immediately endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris late today to be the party's nominee. The vice president tonight now vowing to run, to win, to earn this nomination. The Democratic National Convention just under a month away. Will she get the support she needs, and who will be her pick if she gets the nomination for her running mate? All of this, of course, unfolding just days after Donald Trump and J.D. Vance accepted the Republican nomination. The Trump campaign already responding tonight, saying if President Biden isn't fit to run, he isn't fit to serve. So there is a lot unfolding at this hour. ABC's chief White House correspondent Mary Bruce leading us off. Mary?
24 days after his disastrous performance on the debate stage, battling COVID and relentless pressure from members of his own party, President Biden finally giving in, abandoning his bid for a second term with this historic Sunday night announcement. In a letter addressed to my fellow Americans, the president writing, "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. And while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interests of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." The president adding, "I will speak to the nation later this week in more detail about my decision." Then, minutes later, as the news was still setting in, the president endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris to take his place atop the Democratic ticket, calling picking her as his number 2 the best decision I ever made. Posting on social media, "Today I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be the nominee of our party this year. Democrats, it's time to come together and beat Trump. Let's do this." The vice president has taken on an outsized role on the campaign trail since the debate.
Do we believe in the promise of America? And are we ready to fight for it?
Tonight, in a statement, Harris saying with this selfless and patriotic act, President Biden is doing what he has done throughout his life of service, putting the American people and our country above everything else. Saying, "I am honored to have the president's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination. We have 107 days until Election Day. Together, we will fight, and together, we will win." It took Biden more than 3 weeks to get to this point. In the days after the debate, he was defiant.
"I am running and going to win again. I am all in. My word, I am all in."
In an interview with George Stephanopoulos, the president insisted nothing short of an act of God would get him out of the race.
And if Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi come down and say, "We're worried that if you stay in the race, we're going to lose the House and the Senate," how will you respond?
I go into detail with them. I've spoken to all of them in detail, including Jim Clyburn. Every one of them. They all said I should stay in the race. Stay in the race. None of the people said I should leave.
But if they do?
Well, it's like, they're not going to do that.
You sure?
Well, yeah, I'm sure. Look, I mean, if the Lord Almighty came down and said, Joe, get out of the race, I get out of the race, the Lord Almighty's not coming down.
But the pressure only grew. Actor and Democratic mega donor George Clooney, who had seen Biden just days before the debate, penning an op-ed in the New York Times urging the president to drop out. Writing, "It's devastating to say it, but the Joe Biden I was with 3 weeks ago at the fundraiser was not the Joe Biden of 2010. He wasn't even the Joe Biden of 2020. He was the same man we all witnessed at the debate." Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries told Biden to his face they were concerned he would lose the election and take Democrats down with him in November. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi did that and more. Though Biden made it clear he was firmly in the race, Pelosi going on TV, calling it still an open question.
It's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short.
The floodgates had opened. Ultimately, 40 Democrats in Congress called on Biden to drop out of the race, urging him to do it for the party, for his legacy, for the country he loves so much.
Is there a clear path to victory here? Can we honestly say that we're on a path to beating Donald Trump and holding onto the Senate and holding onto the House of Representatives?
I do not think he is the best person to go into this election. I think if he is our nominee, I think we lose.
Biden fighting on, refusing to give in. But in recent days, sources telling us he was willing to listen to arguments from the other side. And then that new blow, Biden testing positive for COVID, heading home to Delaware to recuperate. And it was there, isolating the First Lady at his side, that sources tell us last night the president finally began to come to his decision. Today, he started making calls to his vice president and his closest aides. At 1:45, telling his senior advisors gathered for a call. And just 1 minute later, Biden releasing his letter to the world. Today, Pelosi calling him a patriotic American who has always put our country first and one of the most consequential presidents in American history. Pelosi sending love and gratitude to President Biden for always believing in the promise of America and giving people the opportunity to reach their fulfillment. Those words echoed tonight by former President Barack Obama, who called Biden one of America's most consequential presidents, as well as a dear friend and partner to me, and a patriot of the highest order. Obama saying it's a testament to Joe Biden's love of country and a historic example of a genuine public servant, once again putting the interests of the American people ahead of his own, that future generations of leaders will do well to follow. No mention, though, from Obama on whether Vice President...
Let's bring in Mary Bruce live at the White House. And Mary, an extraordinary 24 hours. With your sources, take us inside the Biden campaign, inside the president's thinking here. This decision was made over the course of the last 24 hours, and you paid very close attention to his language today.
Yeah, and David, this, of course, was a decision that the president was adamant he was not going to make, but the pressure ultimately just too much to bear. He began to make this decision just last night. Then, of course, everything unfolding very quickly over the last 24 hours. The president huddling last night with just that inner circle of aides, of course, his closest family members, the First Lady by his side throughout it all, coming out today, making this historic decision and announcement that he is going to put his personal interests aside, he said, to do what is best for the party and the country he loves so much, deciding to pass the torch to the next generation, David.
Let's take our viewers inside how this unfolded today. It's our understanding that President Biden, Vice President Harris spoke a number of times today. Obviously, she was clued into this announcement that it was coming, at least at some point today. Eventually, his staff was told just minutes before, if not a minute before that message was sent.
David, the president was on the phone with his senior staff just 1 minute before that announcement went out to the entire world. And yes, we are told he did speak several times throughout the day with Vice President Kamala Harris. What a tremendous whirlwind this must be for her to now not only learn that the president is stepping down, but that we are very much seeing not only the president, but also other party leaders lining up behind her. Tonight, she is now running very much in this race to win it, David.
She says she wants to earn and win this nomination. In the meantime, Mary, one more question for you before we move on. Vice President Harris has faced a unique challenge in these past couple of very difficult weeks politically on the campaign trail for the Biden-Harris campaign, out there defending the president every single day.
There has been no daylight, David, between the vice president and the president as all of this drama has unfolded over the last several weeks, as he has faced this mounting tremendous pressure to drop out of the race. She has been firmly standing by him, and now she will be, she hopes, atop the ticket.
Mary Bruce leading off our special here. Mary, thank you. I want to bring in ABC senior White House correspondent Selena Wang. She's with the president in Delaware outside his Rehoboth Beach home. And Selena, we know Vice President Kamala Harris is already trying to rally support among Democratic leaders. She's been working the phones all afternoon and evening.
Exactly, David. Vice President Kamala Harris is already full steam ahead. We're learning that in just these last few hours, she's been working to shore up support, making calls to Democratic leaders, party leaders, and members of Congress. Now, Vice President Harris, she's already been this administration's leading voice when it comes to these issues that are central to this election, like immigration and abortion. And David, if she does become the nominee, this would be historic. She would be the first Black woman and the first Asian American. She's also already been in critical meetings with President Biden throughout her vice presidency, and this week she is expected to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And as you say, David, she is full steam ahead. She is already fundraising off of this announcement. She says she will do everything in her power to unite the Democratic Party and defeat Donald Trump. Harris is clearly already hitting the ground running. David?
And Selena, in the meantime, I know you're there in Rehoboth Beach. Any indication from the White House, from the Biden campaign, what was the Biden campaign, as to when they think the president will make the trip back to Washington, D.C., back to the White House, and when we might perhaps hear him address the nation?
Well, David, I am learning from a senior administration source that the president is expected to address the nation sometime later this week, not in the coming days. I'm told later in the week. And we did hear from the president's doctor today. He said he is still isolating, but his symptoms are improving significantly. So that is a step up from what we heard the day before, when the doctor said he still had some hoarseness and a loose cough. Now, the president, though, he has been here for several days already, and you can just imagine how difficult it was for him to make this decision, one of the hardest political decisions of his very, very long career, while he was isolated all alone and sick with COVID.
Selena Wang with us. She's in Delaware with the president. Selena, thank you. The Trump campaign tonight already responding to President Biden's decision to step aside. The campaign preparing for Vice President Harris to become the Democratic nominee. They've already released a campaign ad tonight going after Harris's record. So here's Rachel Scott on that for us.
Donald Trump's response to Joe Biden's historic decision to bow out of the race tonight: attack, attack, attack. Trump, who just days ago pledged to unify the country, blasting Biden as the worst president by far in the history of our nation, adding whoever the left puts up now will just be more of the same. It was just over a week ago, after the attempt on Trump's life, that Trump and Biden shared what both men described as a good, respectful chat, Biden calling his rival.
I spoke with him last night. I'm grateful. He's doing well, and Jill and I keep him and his family in our prayers.
Tonight, Trump declaring Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve. And now some of the nation's top Republicans following Trump's lead, calling on Biden to resign from office. House Speaker Mike Johnson saying if Joe Biden is not fit to run for president, he is not fit to serve as president. He must resign the office immediately. The Trump campaign now having to shift course, though they've been preparing for weeks. Trump polling the crowd in Michigan yesterday.
So who would you like to most run against if you're us, if we want to win? Ready? Kamala Harris. Crooked Joe Biden. All right. I don't think we have to go too much further.
The Republican National Committee already out with an ad attacking Vice President Harris, though she's not yet the Democratic nominee.
Warning. The following may upset liberals who don't want voters to know the truth about Kamala Harris.
And tonight, Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, bluntly saying, Joe Biden has been the worst president in my lifetime, and Kamala Harris has been right there with him every step of the way. She owns all of these failures.
So let's bring in Rachel Scott for our primetime special tonight. Rachel, you've been covering this race for president. You've been out there at the Trump rallies. You were there for that awful rally in Butler, Pennsylvania that we watched transpire in the last week and a half. Let me ask you, the Trump campaign, former President Trump, were they actually hoping that the candidate they'd be running against would be President Biden?
Absolutely, David. This was a curveball that they were certainly preparing for, but this is not a curveball that they wanted. Given all the questions about President Biden's age, his mental fitness, also that debate performance, they thought that Donald Trump was best suited against President Biden. Now they are sort of scrambling, trying to readjust to it possibly being Vice President Kamala Harris. Big questions ahead on whether or not we see possibly Harris, if she is the Democratic nominee, face off against former President Donald Trump on that debate stage. A reminder here that Harris is a former prosecutor, David.
She is a prosecutor. I know Democrats who have supported her publicly already have pointed to her time as Attorney General in California, her time on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and say she would be a formidable opponent, at least on a debate stage. The former president tonight indicating that perhaps the debate he's not necessarily going to show up for. I don't want to speak for him, but there have been some hints at that tonight. So we'll have to see if there is a debate, if she is the nominee. The two of them will meet on the debate stage. Of course, there's one planned for ABC. We'd love to see it still play out. We'll wait and see in the coming weeks and months. But in the meantime, what is their playbook if the nominee is Kamala Harris at the end of this convention?
They're going to focus in on really what she concentrated on during this administration. So attacking her specifically on the border. She was sort of in the lead of heading up the situation addressing the migrant crisis at the border. So expect a lot of attacks on immigration, but also on the Democratic side. Remember, Harris is the leading voice on the issue of abortion rights. And that's why Democrats also feel like she'll be very effective on this issue, an issue they hope defines this election in November.
And she sees a stark contrast with the running mate chosen by Donald Trump, particularly when it comes to abortion rights. She's already been out on the campaign trail on that.
Absolutely. And when you look at Senator J.D. Vance, who is obviously serving as former Vice President Donald Trump's running mate, he has been very vague on what he supports in terms of abortion restrictions. We know that he has pushed back against the restrictions in his own state. He's even raised the possibility that he wouldn't support exceptions for rape or incest. Expect Vice President Kamala Harris to continue to hammer him hard on those issues.
One more question before I let you go, Rachel. So inside the Trump campaign tonight, not only are they working with the calculation that they could be up against Vice President Kamala Harris here, given the endorsements, the Democratic Party looking as though it's coalescing behind her. She says she wants to earn this to win this. But if it is her, they obviously are also trying to figure out the second part of that calculation, which would be who is her running mate going to be.
And a lot of Democrats here are saying, look at the battleground states. These are the states that are going to decide the election. So a lot of Democrats already weighing in, talking about Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, for instance, who they believe can be very critical to serving as a possible running mate should Vice President Kamala Harris be the Democratic nominee, David.
Josh Shapiro, obviously very popular first-term governor in Pennsylvania. Rachel, thank you. That's where we're going to take our viewers next. So if Democratic leaders, they say Biden's decision, many of them say, to step aside will help energize the party in this sprint to the finish here in November. If the Vice President, Kamala Harris, prevails in this nomination process, of course, the question, as Rachel just mentioned, who will be her running mate? The Trump campaign waiting to try to figure out what that will look like. If she doesn't get the nomination, who would try to perhaps challenge her at the nomination as well? All of this is uncharted territory, so we asked our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl, to take a look.
She doesn't have a single pledged delegate yet, but Vice President Kamala Harris is quickly emerging as the presumptive Democratic nominee. Even before Harris made it official that she would be running to replace Biden at the top of the ticket, she had locked up key endorsements, starting with Biden himself and former President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. Members of Congress quickly endorsing too.
It's in the interest of continuity, stability, and unity for the Democratic Party to clearly coalesce around Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee.
Including key figures in the House, the political arm of the Congressional Black Caucus, and Jim Clyburn, widely seen as the most important endorsement Biden himself received 4 years ago. And more than a dozen senators. Some of the party's top donors, too, many of them who had cut off support for Biden, have quickly come out to endorse Harris. But again, Kamala Harris doesn't have a single pledged delegate yet. Shortly after Biden bowed out, DNC Chairman Jamie Harrison declared that the party's process for picking his successor, quote, will be governed by established rules and procedures. It's unclear if there will be any major challenge to Harris, but attention is already turning to who she could choose as a running mate. Some of them potential contenders, including Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, Roy Cooper, governor of North Carolina, Phil Murphy, governor of New Jersey, Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky, governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. Also potentially on the list, Gretchen Whitmer from the battleground state of Michigan, who told George just days ago,
I think Michigan is always going to be a state that you can't take your eye off of. People in Michigan are good, hardworking people. We expect our leaders to be as good, if not better, and work just as hard, if not harder. And it's always going to be a close race.
Again, you're watching ABC News live coverage tonight of President Biden's decision to step aside in this race for president. John Carl with me now. And of course, John, this assumes that she is able to fight and to win this nomination, this discussion of who she would pick as a running mate. But obviously, a lot of people are going there already. And I was curious, the list that you just presented for our viewers, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, Roy Cooper from North Carolina, Mark Kelly from Arizona, Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan. No surprise there that we're talking about key battleground states with many of these names you just mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, you know, the running mate is not only about trying to win over one of those battleground states, but it certainly doesn't hurt. And it's notable that the Democrats have significant stars in their party in each of those battleground states you mentioned. But look, I think that you see how the entire dynamics of this race, David, have changed with Joe Biden getting out. And I see what you hear now from Democrats across the board is they are breathing a sigh of relief. They get to have a reset for this race. And on the Republican side, you can clearly see some anxiety, clearly in the statements you've heard today from Donald Trump himself. That unity tone, gone.
John, have they sort of flipped the script on the Republicans tonight?
I mean, they have. They were ready to run against Joe Biden, and frankly, you know, with all the attention on Joe Biden's age, now we have a new oldest party nominee in the history of American politics, and it's not Joe Biden, it's Donald Trump.
Yeah, really interesting. So the age question, the fitness question now is squarely focused on the former president, Donald Trump, for those who are moving forward and are looking at age as an issue. And even President Biden had always said it's a perfectly fair question. John, you were on the air with me all throughout the Republican National Convention last week. Donald Trump told you that he had thrown out the script. It was going to be about unity after that horrific event in Pennsylvania that he survived, the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. We took note that he did speak of unity, particularly at the beginning of the speech, but then the speech took a turn, and a very long turn, and it was a reminder for those who might have been looking for a speech solely about unity that many of the other things that Donald Trump talked about during his acceptance speech at the convention were very common sort of arguments he makes on the campaign trail. And Democrats, we had asked that night after the speech while we were doing analysis among us, you included, John, whether or not Democrats would look at that and say, well, wait a minute, that actually is a familiar playbook.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the unity talk, that was Monday that I spoke to former President Trump. He had said he had ripped up the old convention speech, and that when he came out on Thursday that week, that it would be a note of unity. And you saw a degree of unity during the beginning of the convention. I mean, there was no talk of the stolen election. There were no real hard-edged attacks, or very few hard-edged attacks on Joe Biden. That was gone by the time he got halfway through or a third of the way through Donald Trump's speech. It was gone when he was out campaigning in Michigan with J.D. Vance over the weekend, just yesterday. But now I think you really see Donald Trump in the tone of his social media postings. You know, he is fully back to the Donald Trump that we knew well and saw well in both of his previous presidential campaigns and, frankly, as president.
John, let me ask you about the campaign as it moves forward. Obviously, they're assuming on the Trump side that it's going to be Kamala Harris, given members of the Democratic Party who come out tonight to endorse her, former President Clinton, former Secretary of State Clinton, among the many. I did take note here that the former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, former President Obama, they have not come out to endorse. They had very warm, supportive words for President Biden and what they say he did for the nation when it mattered most, also talking about his decision to step down and the weight of that decision and what that signals from him. But in the meantime, what do you think that they make as far as moving forward, the calculation on the Trump side as far as going after Kamala Harris and try to figure out who she might select if it is her?
Well, David, first of all, I would not take the lack of an endorsement from Barack Obama or Nancy Pelosi as a real, really about having doubts about Kamala Harris. Look, Pelosi and Obama are really arguably the two most important senior statesmen in the Democratic Party right now. There needs to be a process going forward. Kamala Harris herself has referred to a process going forward of not simply being anointed, but having to be, the delegates have to vote for her. As we pointed out, she doesn't have a single pledged delegate. So I think that Pelosi and Obama are really playing the role as party leaders and ultimately will be entirely and very enthusiastically on board with Kamala Harris, assuming she emerges as the nominee, which it sure seems that she is going to do.
Yeah, that was a two-parter. You addressed part of it. You know, this would seem as though it's part of the strategy that they're fully aware of optics here involving a man who was in public life for decades, served as vice president under President Obama, of course, now deciding to step down, which is an historic decision, of course, in and of itself. They're aware that the vice president has to fight for this. Kamala Harris has signaled that as well. And your suggestion here is that they're fully aware of that. That's why they're waiting here.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is also, I think it's very important, as you just pointed out, this is Joe Biden's moment. This was an extraordinary move. It was his decision alone. And he has now just given up something that politicians never give up. I mean, he's president of the United States. He's his party nominee, presumptive nominee. He's got all those delegates, 14 million votes, and he gave it all away. You know, he was pressured, let's face it, he was pressured to do so, but it was his decision. And ultimately, it was a decision of self-sacrifice to pass a baton that he clearly didn't really want to pass.
No question about that. Deeply personal decision, obviously an historic decision. John, one last question before I let you go, because I always pepper you with questions, even if we're not on TV. It was clear that President Biden wanted to see the data. He wanted to see the polling. Do we have any reporting yet on whether or not he was shown polling involving Vice President Kamala Harris, how she would perform up against Trump, not only nationally, but in those key battleground states?
We know that the campaign, the Biden-Harris campaign, had gone into the field to do polling. I haven't seen exactly what that polling show, but I also know that when Chuck Schumer had the meeting you and I spoke about last week, when he went to Rehoboth to meet with President Biden and to urge him to make this decision to get out of the race, that he went armed with polling showing that by staying in the race, he was doing damage to Democratic Senate candidates in the states that they would need to win to keep control of the Senate. So there was a lot of polling going up to Rehoboth, Delaware, addressed to Joe Biden. I don't know exactly what the polling he saw on Kamala Harris was.
And in some of those key Senate races, the Democrats were actually outperforming President Biden, but in recent weeks they were starting to see some erosion even in that respect.
You can outperform the top of the ticket a little bit, but you can't, there's only so much. If the president's really going down, that's the top of the ticket. It made it very hard for those Senate candidates, those sitting senators running for re-election to win. And that's why some of the first senators, David, that you saw come out to say Joe Biden, publicly to say Joe Biden needs to get out, were the senators running in tough states. John Tester in Montana, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, chief among them.
John Carl with us here tonight for our special coverage. John, thank you. So what's this going to look like? We are under a month now until the Democratic National Convention. Hard to believe. We've just left Milwaukee and the Republican National Convention. The big story of this weekend, of course, President Biden deciding to step down in this race for president. So let's bring in our senior national correspondent, Terry Moran. And Terry, it's kind of an impossible question to answer, but what will this convention look like? There have been all sorts of ideas floated about whether or not we would see sort of a mini primary, if you will. It would appear, at least so far, that there has been sort of a coalescing around Kamala Harris from several big names within the Democratic Party and also some key Democratic donors.
Absolutely, David. So that means we could get a normal convention on August 19th, but there's a lot of time between now and then. And Joe Biden, President Biden, has endorsed Kamala Harris to be the Democratic Party nominee for president. But that's not the end of the story, because he's not the decision maker. As you and John Carl were just talking about, the Democratic delegates to the Democratic Convention, they are the decision maker. There are more than 4,500 of them. About 3,900 of them are already pledged to vote for Joe Biden, but all of them, are now free under Democratic Party rules to vote their conscience. And that means that Vice President Harris or anyone else is going to have to earn a simple majority, 1,895 delegates, to get the nomination. The first test of that is going to come in early August. And that is when the Democratic Party is expected to have a virtual vote, a virtual roll call that was originally planned to deal with an Ohio state ballot deadline that came a little bit early. They may use it this time to test her strength. If she gets that 1,895 delegates, that's it. The convention has its nominee, and that's that. If she doesn't, well, then you have the prospect of an open convention, that no one comes to Chicago with a majority of the delegates. That hasn't happened since 1968 in Chicago. That didn't go too well, because what it means is constant lobbying of each and every delegate. It's going to mean maybe backroom deals. It's going to be Lord knows what. And the Democrats desperately want to avoid that. And it looks like, as you say, the party is going to coalesce around Vice President Harris, but she's got to earn those delegates' votes. They're the decision makers.
Is there any suggestion that this turns into a mini primary at this point?
Well, they do have time. She'd need other candidates. So far, I believe only Marianne Williamson has said that she wants to be represented at the Democratic National Convention. So that mini primary would have to be organized in a hurry. It would consist primarily of a few televised debates, region by region. That was the original design when people were talking about whether or not Joe Biden would drop out. If they have that time, if they have those candidates, that may be one way for Vice President Harris or anyone else to earn the nomination with the delegates who would be the primary audience, but also with the country. One of the things the Democrats lack here is a candidate who was tested in the crucible of those primaries. Look at how the Republicans went about it. Obviously, Donald Trump, the front runner, but you saw all those other Republicans lined up, and at the end of the day, after all those debates, it was Nikki Haley who emerged from that crowd as Trump's main rival. Who would have predicted that at the beginning? Primaries test candidates. They show the country who these people are. Vice President Harris is a known commodity. No one else is.
Terry, stick with us here. I'll get you to react to this because we're just learning here. Rachel Scott is now reporting that Senator Joe Manchin is now considering re-registering as a Democrat to run against Vice President Kamala Harris for the presidential nomination, according to two sources with knowledge of his decision. He had indicated earlier that it was time to unify, has changed sort of his position as the day has gotten further along here on the news that President Biden is sort of stepping aside. So perhaps that would be the first name that people at home might know. Joe Manchin saying he's at least considering challenging Harris. The question, Terry, you know, people have long pointed to Donald Trump and have said the chaos sort of follows Donald Trump. Does any of this sort of messiness or in-the-moment attention actually help Democrats with voters sort of focus on them for a while?
Hey, that's a great point, David. You know, voters really didn't want a repeat of Trump and Biden. After the convention, we hit the road, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, talked to voters. And one of the things we heard from everybody, Democrats, independents, undecided, Republicans, that they weren't happy about the choice before them. The Democrats might now be able to generate some excitement about someone new. Looks like Vice President Harris, could be Joe Manchin, could be someone else, and that could help the party. The problem is, if it goes to the convention and you have that kind of fight, the bad blood between the candidates can really wreck candidates' chances. That's what happened in 1968. That's what happened in 2016. Bernie Sanders, came roaring into that convention. It was really Hillary Clinton and what were called then the superdelegates, the party leaders, that helped clinch the nomination for her. And there was bad blood. They don't want to face Donald Trump divided. They want to face Donald Trump united. But Manchin will be able to make his case if he chooses, as will others. And the voters might like that. They might like to see what Vice President Harris is made of in that situation, what Manchin is made of, and anyone else. And that, as I say, is the traditional way in this country. Other countries don't do it this way. But there is virtue in our long campaign. You get to know them. You get to see what they're made of. And in the end, it might get good ratings, and generate a little excitement for the Democrats.
Might generate a little excitement, a little follow-up for you, because we know that Kamala Harris, again, the vice president, has said she wants to get out there and win this nomination, earn the nomination. I mentioned Joe Manchin simply because he's sort of changed his tune late today, suggesting that he might consider that. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, because right now a number of key Democratic leaders have come out and very quickly gotten behind the vice president, Kamala Harris. But even the vice president has signaled that she wants to run and secure this nomination, earning it through the delegates, but really in front of the voters. And Terry, it's interesting. Obviously, we follow all of our own reporting within ABC News, but you and I are both voracious readers of everybody else's reporting out there too. And you know, sometimes on these key political stories, you go into the comments, obviously, on this involving President Biden. Should he step down? Should he continue? And it was really interesting in the last few days. I've seen a lot of voters across the country signal that they weren't completely comfortable with what some have said appears to be sort of the power brokers in the Democratic Party putting pressure on President Biden to do this. So perhaps that is what Vice President Kamala Harris is trying to signal here when she has explicitly said, I want to earn this.
That could well be. Look, this is a painful episode in American political history, in the history of the Democratic Party. They had to push. They had to push Joe Biden because the consensus of the party, of the country, was that he was too old to serve or to win, which is what's on Democrats' mind right now. So that could well be. And it's also, I think, you know, Democrats are now going to watch every single step Kamala Harris takes, every syllable that she says, and she's going to have to meet the moment. She's going to have to look like a president. And if not, there will be Democrats who look around. Look, she did not fare well when she ran in 2020. She had a great moment in a debate where she popped Joe Biden, who was holding him accountable for his position on busing in the 1970s. She says, I was on one of those buses. And then everybody turned their attention to her, and she kind of evaporated. If she cannot hold her own, she will invite a challenge. And the delegates, if they get concerned about winning against Donald Trump, if she gets out there, she may be a star, has been in the past. But if she raises concerns about whether she can beat Donald Trump, you may see other people get in before that virtual vote. Time is short, and things are moving at a real fast pace, but, you know, politics is a tough business.
Terry, one more quick follow-up to that, because you talked about her stumbles when she ran for president herself before being selected by Joe Biden to be his running mate. She's faced very stiff scrutiny as vice president. On the flip side of that, just to ask you about this, there are some out there who say the scrutiny that comes along with being sort of the number two, the vice president, is very difficult. It's not always a clearly defined role, and perhaps the bar is a little low here as far as actually hearing from her. Being the top of the ticket is very different from being the supporting character, the supporting cast member who stands back, watches it, and defends the president, which she's done. A real opportunity, much more scrutiny, much more difficult running when you're the top of the ticket, but it comes with greater exposure, greater opportunity to let people see what you can do.
Absolutely. There is very different being a vice presidential candidate than being a presidential candidate, as you point out. And there have been plenty of vice presidents who thought they were going to be president and didn't become president. Al Gore and Mike Pence and countless others. Now, Vice President Harris has the blessing of Joe Biden here. She's got the party coalescing around her. But at the end of the day, she really has to demonstrate that whatever happened to her in the primary, she was one of the first to drop out well before Iowa, that was a fluke, and she's a different person. She certainly has been tested as vice president. She's been given some important responsibilities. She's close to power. She gets it now in a way she couldn't have when she was a United States senator. If voters see that confidence, that readiness to have power, then they'll go with her. But if they see her stumble again, look, we're in uncharted waters, obviously, right now. And there are, believe me, sharks in those waters. They are willing to get in and if they can, steal a march on Kamala Harris and get ahead of her, perhaps. But that's a long way off. Right now, the Democratic Party is talking about unity, and you can feel it.
It's so funny you say that. I'm going to wrap this up, Terry, move on. We have a lot of others to get to with some new reporting here. But on your point there, we got a lot of time. It's just funny to hear that. You know, as we're in July, we know there isn't, in a conventional campaign, a lot of time when you're looking at November, it's staring down Election Day. But in this country, and with this 24-hour news cycle that we've had in the year 2024, every day it seems like it's a new episode. So your point on there's a lot of time to sort of change the narrative here, that is certainly true, particularly in these times. Might not have been true 4 years, 8 years, you know, in presidential campaigns past, but that is the country we're living in now. Terry, stick by, and we'll get back to you later in the evening. I do want to get to this news that's crossing moments ago. California's Governor Gavin Newsom has now endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. He said, tough, fearless, tenacious, with our democracy at stake and our future on the line, no one is better to prosecute the case against Donald Trump's dark vision and guide our country in a healthier direction than America's Vice President Kamala Harris. I was talking about this with Rachel Scott earlier, this notion that Kamala Harris was an attorney general in California. He talks about her role as a prosecutor. She, of course, was on the Senate Judiciary Committee for Supreme Court nominations. The country has seen her in that role. It's been some time, though, seeing her front and center as sort of a prosecutor prosecuting a case. Now, if given this opportunity, if she earns it, in her words, this nomination, that will be her task moving forward. When we come back here, the question many of you might have at home, the state of the race. So if it is Vice President Kamala Harris, how does she do in the polls against Donald Trump, not only nationally, but in some of the key battlegrounds? Rick Klein is standing by with the numbers tonight. Martha Raddatz also has new reporting inside sort of the mindset of President Biden in Delaware this weekend, recovering from COVID, a deeply personal, agonizing decision after decades in public service to step aside. What is his frame of mind tonight? What was the evolution to get here? She has new reporting here in a moment. Our live coverage of President Biden's decision to withdraw from the race for president will continue in a moment.
They call him the beauty queen killer. He's targeting young women in malls.
I am single. I want to join the company of a member of women.
He tortured me.
How did she survive 9 days of terror?
The word accomplice came up. Nobody knows the real story.
The Beauty Queen Killer. Only on Hulu. Why do so many people start their day here?
From ABC News, this is Start Here.
To be in the know and get a different take on the day's top stories.
A lot of news today, so let's get into it.
Listen now to the Daily News Podcast honored with 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards and see why the New York Times calls it a news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, ABC News. Make it your daily first listen.
Now, that's a part of the story I bet you didn't see coming.
Wherever you get your podcasts, start here. Nightline, the stories that shape your world, that shape your life. Dramatic, stunning, empowering, jaw-dropping. The most powerful stories of our time. Nightline, on right after Kimmel and streaming on Hulu.
If you could have the Brat Pack name not exist, would you? I hated the Brat Pack. What a disaster.
Why did we take it as an offense?
Whenever, wherever news breaks, it's so important to always remember that lives are changed. Here in London, in Buffalo, Uvalde, Texas, Edinburgh, Scotland. Reporting from Rolling Fork, Mississippi. Ukrainian refugees here in Warsaw. We're heading to a small community outside of Mexico City. Getting you behind the stories as they happen. ABC News Live Prime. We'll take you there.
Stream ABC News Live weeknights wherever you stream your news. Only on ABC News Live.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Sabrina.
And we're moms, juggling tons of stuff every day, like all you moms out there.
And you know what we love?
Really love
pop culture.
So listen now to our new podcast, Pop Culture Moms,
wherever you get your podcasts.
There was a specific moment during our wedding. I looked at Jason and I realized this was real. This was our family.
This is her knight in shining armor.
Everything felt right. All of a sudden, I found this hidden folder. I opened it, and I don't think I can say it. I'm sorry.
She put her hand to her mouth and, gasped.
Jason would kill me before he would let me tell anyone this part of him.
He's in so much freaking trouble.
I remember just feeling like, what the hell? That was my dad. What is going on? That's when that fire inside of me shifted to like a flame. I was like, it's on. Betrayal is one of the hardest types of trauma to overcome. He didn't think I had it in me to do something. So I did.
Betrayal, a father's secret. The all-new season, only on Hulu.
Hey, good morning, America. Good morning, America.
Good morning, America.
Are you ready? They are ready. Covering the biggest events in the country right now.
There's a lot going on here this morning.
You don't just see it, you feel it.
I'm in.
I'm in.
I'm in too. I'll be here.
I am here and so happy.
I'm in.
I'm in too.
Michael, George, Clara,
Ginger.
All right, let the dogs out, please.
I don't think he's going to give you a hard time.
Even if he gives me a hard time, I'm the right guy.
I want to make sure that we all learn together.
Calm, confident.
Calm, confident, calm, surrender.
Everything that he's taught has become a reality.
We are so grateful and impressed.
I feel like crying. You changed our world.
It is a beautiful thing to see. As you rehabilitate the dog, you also rehabilitate you.
Welcome back tonight. ABC News Live coverage of President Biden's historic decision to step down in this race for president. I want to bring in former head of the DNC, ABC News contributor Donna Brazile. Donna, always good to have you. I would have reached out to you, but we're on the air, so I'll do it right here on the air for our viewers to listen to as well. This virtual roll call that's coming in the coming weeks, even before the convention begins, that is still on track. And do you believe it'll be the Vice President Kamala Harris who is the eventual nominee here?
Well, first of all, I'm very sad, and like many Democrats, that Joe Biden decided to step back. But I'm also very excited that he has passed the torch on to a proven leader, someone who's battle-tested. She has been vice president for the last 3.5 years. She has met with foreign leaders. She's done the job, and I know that she's ready to take on former President Donald Trump. With regards to our nominating process, David, as you well know, there are several states that have deadlines to get on the ballot before our convention is gavelled in on August 19th. So we're trying to ensure that our nominee will have the ability to get on the ballot in all 50 states in the District of Columbia. As we speak, my friends are sending me notes. So I want to let John Call know that tomorrow the Nebraska delegates will make their consideration. Alabama has made theirs. My beloved home state of Louisiana. I'm going to get on the phone with all of the D.C. delegates to ensure that she's able to get the delegates that she needs to have her name placed in nomination. This process is open. It's open, it's transferable. Look, the president today at 1:45, I may not have the right time, but he decided to drop out of the race. He also decided to endorse Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris' name is not on the ballot with regards to the delegate. So she will have to secure their nomination. She needs 300 delegates to put her name into nomination, and she will need over 1,980 delegates in order to be the next nominee of the Democratic Party. We're going to work very hard. I support Kamala Harris. I know there may be some other candidates that decide to get in the race, but I will support Kamala Harris in an open and transparent process.
So just to explain this to the viewers, Donna, and you did a great job there, but I just want to make sure everybody's clear on this. Even before the nomination, because there are some states and the dates on the calendar, you've got to make sure that their delegates are heard even before the convention so that their numbers count too in coming up with a nominee. So even though that process begins now, some are going to say, well, wait a minute, we just heard the vice president say, I want to earn this, I want to win this nomination. If the process begins so soon, where does the winning and the earning come? Or is that just simply part of this sort of rollout of this process?
Well, as you all know, Joe Biden ran with Kamala Harris as his running mate in 2020. They received over 81 million votes. Joe Biden ran with Kamala Harris this year as his running mate, and they received over 14 million votes. Those votes are now translated into delegates. There are over 4,000 delegates to the 2024 Democratic Convention. But in order to get on the ballot in all 50 states in the District of Columbia, the nominee of the party must be handed this nomination before August 7th. And when I say August 7th, we have to take into consideration the Ohio deadline, also the Washington State deadline, the Oklahoma, Montana, as well as the great state of California, which with 54 electoral votes, their deadline is actually on the night that the next nominee would be given that title. So we want to get this done. We want to ensure that the nominees on the ballot. But first, the person has to they have to earn the delegates. They have to earn the votes of the delegates, and that is what the vice president is doing now. She's calling up delegations. She's calling up delegate leaders. She's calling up leaders because she wants to secure the nomination. She's working the phone. I suspect that she'll be working it all night until she gets the 1,980 votes.
I know you've been an informal advisor to Kamala Harris along the way in her political career. It's really interesting, Donna, and thanks for the explanation. You mentioned Ohio, Washington, Oklahoma, Montana, among the states that have deadlines even before the Democratic National Convention. So take our viewers inside the convention, if you will. I know you don't have sort of a crystal ball, kind of impossible at this point because we're in uncharted territory here, but it's less than a month away. By night 4 of the convention, which of course is the big night with the nominee, do you believe it's going to be the vice president?
I think she has a head start for 2 reasons. She crisscrossed this country. She was able to connect with voters, and like Joe Biden in 2020, she was able to get so much support out there. There are people who are literally calling me, David, saying, how can I sign on? I said, we need pledged delegates. We need delegates. And we encourage everyone to go out and raise some money and begin to take their assignments in terms of helping to build a kind of momentum. David, we have spent 3 weeks and 3 days contemplating whether or not the president of the United States would step back. He decided today at about 1:45. I was on a call at 2 o'clock to certify the delegates. We certified the delegates around 2:45 p.m. today, Eastern time. Now that we have an official list of delegates, then it is up to the vice president and anyone else who want to toss their hat of gloves into the ring to go out there and secure the delegates that they need in order to get this nomination. We're encouraging them to do it fast because I don't think we're going to slow down the process. We just got to quicken the pace, so to speak.
Any chance it's going to be a contested convention?
Well, I don't know the candidates. I talked to Joe Manchin a few minutes ago. He wanted to inquire about the process. I had to remind him that in order to put his name in nomination, he has to sign a form that he's a Democrat. He left the party a couple of months ago.
Did he say he's willing to do that?
I want to make sure that everyone. Well, David, I had to come and talk to you. You're actually my boo tonight.
You
so
put me before Manchin tonight? Is that what you're saying?
Right back with him. Look, I know so many members of this party. It's a great party. It's going to unify around the nominee. But if it's Kamala Harris, the vice president knows she has to earn it. We're Democrats. We make you work for it. We make you tell us what you want to do and how you're going to do it. So she's going to have to step up and run this campaign the way Joe Biden has run his campaign. And I do believe that she will be able to finish the job that Joe Biden started.
Donna, as you know, you were part of the coverage last week. We spent a week on the Republicans last week. Now we have this major story on the Democratic side. You know, you and I have both obviously studied the polling here. We know that the numbers were very high when voters were polled, particularly among the Democrats, about concerns when it comes to President Biden's age, fitness for another 4 years. But you also know, Donna, I always love to flip the coin. I'm mindful that 14 million people did vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in this primary. What do you say to voters out there tonight who are upset, who are saying, well, wait a minute, I voted for Joe Biden and he's now dropped out?
Well, they were aware that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were running together. Before the primary season began, the vice president, along with the president, they were raising money. They were building the infrastructure. They were opening up campaign offices. She has been out of this city practically every week, 2-3 times a week, trying to help the president secure the nomination and raise the money. So I think the voters out there are familiar with Kamala Harris. They're familiar with her record. They're familiar with the knowledge that she has brought to this ticket. And don't forget, in 2020, with Kamala Harris' support, Joe Biden was able to secure 306 electoral votes, 81 million votes. So I'm confident that she's going to work very hard to try to pull together the Democratic Party over the next 72 of 96 hours. And she's going to secure that nomination.
We've seen some of the polling, the national polling, and in some of the polling, it shows that she might do a little bit better than President Biden up against Donald Trump. The question, Donna Brazil, is in the key battlegrounds, as you know, and in some of those states, there are a couple where she does a little bit better, but in some of the states in the key battlegrounds, she doesn't do as well as President Biden. Can she pull off these battlegrounds?
I think with the help of President Biden and many, many others, you've seen the type of support that continues to trickle in from all across the Democratic Party. I do believe that she will be able to close the gap and once again bring the Democratic Party to victory in the fall. But this is also about uniting not just the Democratic Party. We started talking last week about uniting the country. I hope that she will come forward with her message, her vision, because the country really wants change.
All right, Donna Brazil with us for our live coverage here tonight. President Biden's decision to back away in this race for president. Donna, thank you. Stick with us here. We're going to continue with other members of the team. Rick Klein, our political director, Washington bureau chief. And Rick, you heard what I just asked Donna. You know, it all comes down to the polls. We know that President Biden wanted to see some of this data. Kamala Harris performs about the same, maybe a little better nationally up against Donald Trump. There are some bright spots, I think, on the Democratic side for the Democrats in some of the battlegrounds, but make no mistake, the numbers that I've seen show that she has a very stiff challenge ahead if she's the nominee in these key battlegrounds.
That's exactly right, David. This does not solve all of the Democrats' problems. In fact, it could make them worse in some states if you believe the very early battleground state polls. There hasn't been much out there. We have seen a national poll that came out just in the last couple of days that had a dead tie between between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And we also had some new polling out today from ABC News and Ipsos that showed favorability ratings for some of the major candidates. Check that out. Kamala Harris's number a little bit better than Joe Biden, but not as good as Donald Trump. Trump got a significant boost out of his convention and out of the assassination attempt. So these numbers still have to be concerning to Democrats, but they've got a lot of time to try to build up Harris. And it was significant in your interview with Donna right there that they are going to continue to push to have a virtual roll call ahead of the actual convention. The deadline is actually going to be August 7th, according to Donna, who's part of the Democratic National Committee. That pushes things up. And that tells you some of the urgency now among Democrats. They want to get this squared away to stop any challenges that could happen on the convention floor. That remains the plan of the Democratic National Committee at this hour, to try to get this all wrapped up in a bow before they arrive in Chicago. That is going to be a tough task, with Senator Manchin and others circling about other opportunities.
We have just a few moments left in this hour. Rick, thank you. We have a whole hour coming up for you, but I want to give Martha Raddatz the last word tonight, because, Martha, with just a few moments left, the mindset tonight for President Biden these last 24 hours have been deeply personal and difficult for not only the president, but his family.
For all of them, because we saw how badly Joe Biden wanted to stay in this race. We were reporting last week that he was lashing out at people who would suggest he leave. He truly thought he could get over the hump here, that he could make up for that disastrous debate. So it was a difficult decision. He does not think, according to a senior official, that he is mentally impaired. He thinks this is all about energy, but he wouldn't want to say mentally impaired. He's still the president.
Martha Raddatz with us this hour as well. Martha, thanks so much, and thanks to our entire team. They're all still reporting this story out. We have another hour in prime time. President Biden stepping down in this race for president. What does it mean moving forward against Donald Trump? And if the vice president becomes the eventual nominee on the Democratic side? I'm David Muir. I'll see you just moments from now for another hour in prime time.
What's this?
That's for Pepper.
Susan Powell was a young, beautiful mother. She just one night vanished.
Where is Susan? July 29th, making sure that if something happens to me, our assets are documented.
Josh, did you kill your wife? I'll never forget the first time that I met him. A chill just raced up through my spine. I just shook the hand of a killer.
Now, stunning details.
He ends up revealing the biggest bombshell.
What will happen next? 2020, Friday at 9/8 Central on ABC.
They call him the Beauty Queen Killer. He's targeting young women in malls.
I am single. I want to enjoy the company of a member of women.
He tortured me.
How did she survive 9 days of terror?
The word accomplice came up. Nobody knows the real story.
The Beauty Queen Killer, only on Hulu.
What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
We are part of an operation.
Is this our combat operations center?
We're approaching the gate. Militants came in from different directions.
Nuclear reactor.
So you have a couple loaded and ready to go. The house is destroyed, but the flag...
Not a carrying it.
How important it made the USA. Great work.
Hi. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Ismail? David.
I'm David Muir.
I know who you are.
You
Watch
do?
you every night.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir is America's most watched newscast.
All right, let the dogs out, please.
I don't think he's going to give you a hard time.
Even if he gives me a hard time, I'm the right guy.
You can handle it.
I want to make sure that we all learn together.
Calm confidence.
Calm, confident, calm, surrender.
Everything that he's taught has become a reality.
We are so grateful and impressed.
I feel like crying. You changed our world.
It is a beautiful thing to see. As you rehabilitate the dog, you also rehabilitate you.
Tonight, an ABC News primetime special. Live coverage, President Biden bowing to pressure and withdrawing from the race for the White House. The president tonight calling it in the best interest of the party and the country and giving his full endorsement to Vice President Kamala Harris, upending the race for president. Tonight, Donald Trump and the Republican Party launching attacks on the vice president, assuming she's the nominee. A special edition of ABC News and our coverage of the race for president begins right now.
Tonight, President Biden stands down. The race for the White House. The president's historic decision to withdraw from the race against Donald Trump. Pressure mounting for weeks following his poor performance at the debate. The floodgates opening, with more Democrats calling on him to drop out. Vice President Kamala Harris now in the spotlight. What will Democrats do now? Will they rally behind her or take their fight to the Democratic National Convention 29 days away? Donald Trump and the Republican Party already on the attack. How will American voters respond? This is an ABC News special. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good evening again on this consequential night. We are coming back on the air this evening with the breaking news in the race for the White House. The campaign turned upside down tonight. President Biden on this Sunday dropping out of the race for president, bowing to tremendous pressure that had been growing in recent weeks from people within his own party to pass the torch to a younger generation of leaders. President Biden making his decision in the last 24 hours, releasing a letter earlier today to my fellow Americans. Biden calling being president, quote, the greatest honor of my life. The president goes on to reveal it is in the best interest, in his opinion, of my party and the country for me to stand down. The president facing growing calls to withdraw from the race following his difficult debate performance against Donald Trump. That was 24 days ago. The president had called it a bad night, saying he was exhausted. And then last week, during the Republican National Convention, we learned President Biden had COVID. He came off the campaign trail. We saw him moving slowly there, getting off Air Force One. He went into isolation to get better at his home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Over the weekend, he held multiple Zoom calls with his family. They were supporting him in whatever he decided would be best for the country. President Biden revealing that decision today and then immediately endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris to be the Democratic Party's nominee. The vice president vowing to run, to win, to earn this nomination tonight. The Democratic National Convention, by the way, less than a month away now. So, of course, many questions to get to in this hour. Will she get the support she needs? Will the party unify behind her? And if so, who would her pick be for running mate? All of this unfolding just days after Donald Trump and J.D. Vance accepted the Republican nomination. Tonight, the Trump campaign already responding, saying if President Biden isn't fit to run, they're arguing now he isn't fit to serve in these coming months. So again, a lot unfolding at this hour. I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, leading us off. First off, Mary, let's go inside these last 24 hours. What your sources have told you about the evolution of this decision from the president, because we know that he made this decision just over the weekend here. This wasn't something he had in his mind, late last week. There was increasing pressure. He was dealing with COVID. He was on the campaign trail, came off it to recover, but very much indicated he was still in this fight. So take us through the weekend, the evolution, the private meetings, those closest to him. How did this work?
Well, David, this was the decision that the president did not want to make. For weeks, he was adamant that he wasn't going anywhere, that he was all in on fighting for a second term, that he was going to beat Donald Trump. But the political pressure, it was clear it was just going to be too much to bear. And then just over the last 24 hours, the president isolating with COVID, recuperating, huddling at his Delaware beach house with just his closest advisors, those who have been by his side for decades, and of course, his wife and family members. David, the president just alerting his staff of this 1 minute before he made it public to the world. The president ultimately saying that he had to put his personal interests aside to do what he believes is best for the party and the country that he loves so dearly.
Tonight, 24 days after his disastrous performance on the debate stage, battling COVID and relentless pressure from members of his own party, President Biden finally giving in, abandoning his bid for a second term with this historic Sunday night announcement. In a letter addressed to my fellow Americans, the president writing, "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. And while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interests of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." The president adding, "I will speak to the nation later this week in more detail about my decision." Then, minutes later, as the news was still setting in, the president endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris to take his place atop the Democratic ticket, calling picking her as his number 2 the best decision I ever made. Posting on social media, "Today I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be the nominee of our party this year. Democrats, it's time to come together and beat Trump. Let's do this." The vice president has taken on an outsized role on the campaign trail since the debate.
Do we believe in the promise of America? And are we ready to fight for it?
Tonight, in a statement, Harris saying with this selfless and patriotic act, President Biden is doing what he has done throughout his life of service, putting the American people and our country above everything else. Saying, "I am honored to have the president's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination. We have 107 days until Election Day. Together, we will fight, and together, we will win." It took Biden more than 3 weeks to get to this point. In the days after the debate, he was defiant.
"I am running and going to win again. I am all in. My word, I am all in."
In an interview with George Stephanopoulos, the president insisted nothing short of an act of God would get him out of the race.
And if Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi come down and say, "We're worried that if you stay in the race, we're going to lose the House and the Senate," how will you respond?
I go into detail with them. I've spoken to all of them in detail, including Jim Clyburn. Every one of them. They all said I should stay in the race. Stay in the race. None of the people said I should leave.
But if they do?
Well, it's like, they're not going to do that.
You sure?
Well, yeah, I'm sure. Look, I mean, if the Lord Almighty came down and said, "Joe, get out of the race," I'd get out of the race. The Lord Almighty's not coming down.
But the pressure only grew. Actor and Democratic mega donor George Clooney, who had seen Biden just days before the debate, penning an op-ed in the New York Times, urging the president to drop out. Writing, "It's devastating to say it, but the Joe Biden I was with 3 weeks ago at the fundraiser was not the Joe Biden of 2010. He wasn't even the Joe Biden of 2020. He was the same man we all witnessed at the debate." Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries told Biden to his face they were concerned he would lose the election and take Democrats down with him in November. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi did that and more. Though Biden made it clear he was firmly in the race, Pelosi going on TV, calling it still an open question.
It's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short.
The floodgates had opened. Ultimately, 40 Democrats in Congress called on Biden to drop out of the race, urging him to do it for the party, for his legacy, for the country he loves so much.
What's on everybody's mind, is there a clear path to victory here? And can we honestly say that we're on a path to defeating Donald Trump and holding onto the Senate and holding onto the House of Representatives?
I do not think he is the best person to go into this election. I think if he is our nominee, I think we lose.
Biden fighting on, refusing to give in. But in recent days, sources telling us he was willing to listen to arguments from the other side. And then that new blow, Biden testing positive for COVID, heading home to Delaware to recuperate. And it was there, isolating the First Lady at his side, that sources tell us last night the president finally began to come to his decision. Today, he started making calls to his vice president and his closest aides. At 1:45, telling his senior advisors gathered for a call. And just 1 minute later, Biden releasing his letter to the world. Today, Pelosi calling him a patriotic American who has always put our country first and one of the most consequential presidents in American history. Pelosi sending love and gratitude to President Biden for always believing in the promise of America and giving people the opportunity to reach their fulfillment. Those words echoed tonight by former President Barack Obama, who called Biden one of America's most consequential presidents, as well as a dear friend and partner to me, and a patriot of the highest order. Obama saying it's a testament to Joe Biden's love of country and a historic example of a genuine public servant, once again putting the interests of the American people ahead of his own, that future generations of leaders will do well to follow. No mention, though, from Obama on whether Vice President Harris should now become the Democratic nominee. Two people who are getting behind Harris, Bill and Hillary Clinton. In a statement, the former president and Secretary of State calling Biden the country's North Star, saying we are honored to join the president in endorsing Vice President Harris and will do whatever we can to support her. Tonight, First Lady Jill Biden forwarding her husband's announcement with a heart. Her communications director telling us the First Lady was supportive of whatever road he chose. She's his biggest believer, champion, and always on his side. And from the president's son, Hunter, an emotional statement. For my entire life, I've looked at my dad in awe. How could he suffer so much heartache and yet give so much of whatever remained of his heart to others? He is unique in public life today in that there is no distance between Joe Biden the man and Joe Biden the public servant of the last 54 years. I'm so lucky every night I get to tell him I love him and to thank him. I ask all Americans to join me tonight in doing the same.
Deeply personal moment for the Biden family, and we all have to be mindful of that no matter where we are on the political spectrum. For our viewers at home, he's been in the public eye for many decades, Mary Bruce. This must not have been an easy decision for the president and his family, who we know were some of the people he turned to in these last few days. Sources telling you he began to come to this decision last night, and he says he'll serve out the remainder of his term. He's also indicated, Mary, that he's going to come before the American people to share more with them how he came to this decision. Do we know when?
Well, David, we are told that the president in the coming days will be coming before cameras to explain himself this remarkable decision to the American people. And this has been, I think, as you noted, a deeply painful, frustrating experience for many, not just in his family, but those closest to him, that inner circle of his advisors who have been with him throughout all of this. There is a sense tonight coming from those close to Biden, close to his family, close to this campaign, of real relief. I think seeing the pressure build on him politically, seeing him, going through all of this so publicly was really difficult. And you do have to remember that Joe Biden spent a lifetime trying to get right here, trying to get to the White House. He spent more than 50 years in public service and in politics. He was just 29 years old when he was elected to the Senate, and now he's going to leave the White House, the oldest president ever to serve. He is going to explain that decision publicly to the American people in the coming days. For now, David, he remains isolating at his beach house in Delaware. We know he's been working the phones. We know he's reached out several times to Kamala Harris today. What a whirlwind day she must have had, and what a whirlwind this has been for the entire Biden world and the Biden family, David.
Yeah, and on that point, Mary, this was such a closely held personal decision for the president that his closest, administration officials and certainly campaign officials did not know until just before the message went out. And when it comes to the vice president, you and your team now reporting that they did speak multiple times today. Obviously, she had to be prepared for the possibility that this would be coming, but she didn't know, as far as our reporting so far, until today.
Exactly, David. She didn't know either. This difficult decision, the most difficult decision of Joe Biden's life, was made huddled with just a handful of his closest advisors over the last 24 hours. Vice President Kamala Harris learning of this today and then having multiple conversations with the president. Of course, I'm sure she has thought of this, given all of what is going on in the public conversation here. But over the last several weeks, she has been out there hitting the trail hard, showing no kind of daylight, of course, between her and the president. She has been out there championing, pushing the message of this campaign, especially reaching out to critical constituencies who they know they will need come November, especially reaching out to black voters, young black voters who polls show their support may be slipping. She's been out there hitting the top issue of abortion rights, reproductive rights, which they know will be central in this campaign. And now, David, we know she is expected to hit the trail in the coming days But what a different set of circumstances it will be when she gets out there before voters, David.
Yeah, the scrutiny will be harsh. It's much different to be potentially at the top of the ticket, obviously, than to be the number 2. But in these last couple of weeks, Mary, when this campaign was facing some very difficult days, that very tough debate performance from President Biden up against former President Donald Trump, and yet the vice president faced a very unique test in just the last couple of weeks before she faces this even larger test now ahead of her. But these last couple of weeks, knowing that this question was out there, that the polling was out there, that people were saying and asking serious questions about the president's age, about whether he should stay in this race, and she had to go out there, defend him, stand behind him, obviously not knowing if she was going to get that phone call today.
What a tremendous circumstance to be out there on the trail, fiercely defending this candidacy, adamant that the president was not going anywhere, that he was staying at the top of the ticket, all while knowing and perhaps thinking that she might be in this exact scenario, knowing that pollsters were out there asking questions, to see how she would fare at the top of the ticket against Trump. There were some polls that actually showed her faring slightly better than Joe Biden, but the entire time she was a loyal soldier, David. She was out there fighting for what is at the root of this campaign, a message that she is going to continue to make, because, David, tonight, the Biden for President campaign is now officially the Harris for President campaign. Her campaign aides telling me they are now full steam ahead for Vice President Harris.
So Biden campaign now called the Harris campaign from this point forward.
That is the message tonight. They've actually officially filed the paperwork. They are now the Harris for President campaign. And David, just in the last few hours, we are told from small dollar donors, they have raked in over $27.5 million just in the last 5 hours since Joe Biden announced he is dropping out. Kamala Harris is already out there making fundraising appeals. And in fact, Joe Biden has also been making fundraising appeals for her, too.
All right, the breaking news right there from Mary Bruce. It is now officially the Harris campaign moving forward. So let's get the Republican reaction to that. Michael Whatley, of course, co-chair of the Republican National Committee, the RNC. First of all, Mr. Whatley, congratulations on the Republican National Convention. I know you were very happy with those 4 nights in Milwaukee. We were glad to be there reporting on it all. Obviously, a brand new chapter tonight with President Biden deciding to get out of this race. How does it change the strategy moving forward for the RNC? What do you make of Vice President Kamala Harris potentially being at the top of the ticket?
Well, quite a political split screen when you consider that we were coming out of a historically successful convention and the Republican Party is more united than it has been in generations behind Donald Trump. And we have a very strong vice presidential candidate in Senator J.D. Vance. And we are moving forward, playing offense all across the country. The Democrats have been in complete disarray for over a month now. The fact that they now have no candidate, they're going to have to go through this process moving forward with it. What I will say on our side of the fence, President Trump is going to hit his marks, just like he did in the debate. Just like he did during the convention, just like he has done throughout the course of this campaign. He's going to talk directly to the American people about the issues that they care about, and the contrast could not be bigger.
Let me ask you, though, because suddenly he becomes the oldest candidate in this race at 78 years old. Is this sort of flipping the script from the Democrats, that perhaps now that focus that President Biden faced will turn squarely to the former president, particularly if Kamala Harris is the nominee and if she chooses a running mate sort of more youthful, that ticket would be perhaps perceived by sort of people looking for the next generation of leaders in this country, no matter where they are on the political spectrum?
Not at all. I think we saw President Trump get up off the ground after being shot, say that he's going to continue to fight for the American people. We saw him at all 4 nights of the Republican convention, and he gave a very strong speech to accept his nomination, as well as a rally that we held yesterday up in Michigan. He absolutely has the strength and the resilience to continue to lead the Republican Party. But more importantly, he is the candidate that's going to be able to unify the entire country by restoring our southern border, restoring the economy, and restoring our standing in the world.
Michael, I know that you have been part of this behind the scenes. The RNC, the Republicans, the Trump campaign had agreed to do a debate here in September on ABC up against President Biden. Now that it looks like it could potentially be Vice President Kamala Harris, you guys still game for this debate here on ABC, Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris potentially?
Yeah, President Trump has said that he would accept a debate anywhere, anytime, any place. What we want to do is talk directly to the American people and talk about President Biden's failures as a president, but those are now the Biden-Harris campaign failure. So whether it's Kamala Harris or it's anybody else, they have doubled down on every single one of the policies that we've seen the Biden and Harris administration adopt over the last 4 years, that they have dismantled the most secure southern border and invited 10 million illegal immigrants to come across it, that they have put inflationary policies that have driven gasoline prices, grocery prices, and housing prices through the roof, and they've weakened our standing in the world. So Kamala Harris, any other candidate on the Democratic side of the aisle, has adopted those same platforms. They're doubling down on the same issues, and we welcome that debate anywhere, anytime.
So just to laser in on that, if it is Kamala Harris who becomes the nominee here, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, he will show up in September here on ABC.
You know, obviously, I'll defer to the president in terms of any of the details that they want to have with it, but we've made it very clear that we welcome that debate because we want to talk about the contrast between the Biden-Harris agenda and Donald Trump's agenda, where he is going to unite America and lead us into a bolder future.
Michael Whatley, the chair of the Republican National Committee, giving us a bit of a preview of the playbook ahead against Kamala Harris. Michael, we sure do appreciate it, and we appreciate your words. We look forward to that debate down the road here, not too far away. Thanks so much, Michael. In the meantime, the Trump campaign already responding to President Biden's decision to step aside tonight. You heard a little bit of it from Michael there, what they plan to, the issues that will be front and center in going after Vice President Kamala Harris, should she become the Democratic nominee. In fact, the RNC releasing a campaign ad already tonight going after Harris's record. For more on that, here's Rachel Scott tonight.
Donald Trump's response to Joe Biden's historic decision to bow out of the race tonight: attack, attack, attack. Trump, who just days ago pledged to unify the country, blasting Biden as the worst president by far in the history of our nation, adding whoever the left puts up now will just be more of the same. It was just over a week ago, after the attempt on Trump's life, that Trump and Biden shared what both men described as a good, respectful chat, Biden calling his rival.
I spoke with him last night. I'm grateful. He's doing well, and Jill and I keep him and his family in our prayers.
Tonight, Trump declaring Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve. And now some of the nation's top Republicans following Trump's lead, calling on Biden to resign from office. House Speaker Mike Johnson saying if Joe Biden is not fit to run for president, he is not fit to serve as president. He must resign the office immediately. The Trump campaign now having to shift course, though they've been preparing for weeks. Trump polling the crowd in Michigan yesterday.
So who would you like to most run against if you're us, if we want to win? Ready? Kamala Harris. Crooked Joe Biden. All right. I don't think we have to go too much further.
The Republican National Committee already out with an ad attacking Vice President Harris, though she's not yet the Democratic nominee.
Warning. The following may upset liberals who don't want voters to know the truth about Kamala Harris.
And tonight, Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, bluntly saying, Joe Biden has been the worst president in my lifetime, and Kamala Harris has been right there with him every step of the way. She owns all of these failures.
Rachel Scott back with us tonight. In fact, you broke the news here on ABC today. Excellent coverage this afternoon leading up to this moment. In the meantime, a lot of fast-moving parts here already. Kamala Harris says she will win this nomination. She has less than a month until the Democratic National Convention. You've got the Trump campaign already responding tonight with the assumption that it's going to be Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket. What are your sources telling you? We heard from Mr. Whatley there at the RNC, got a hint of what their playbook will be: immigration, inflation, some of the key issues that they were already going after President Biden with. They plan to now pivot, if you will, to Vice President Kamala Harris, assuming she's the nominee. And it appears that they are assuming that is what they're targeting right now, the vice president. It sort of does flip the script for them in a way, does it not? Were they hoping that they would continue running against President Biden?
They were really hoping that it would be President Biden on the Democratic ticket. I mean, look, this is not an ideal scenario even for the Trump campaign. We are 100 days out from the election. So imagine picking your running mate at this point, going through the Republican National Convention, accepting the Republican nomination, and now all of a sudden you're trying to figure out who exactly you're running against, the one benefit they do see is that Harris still has this tie, right, to President Biden. Of course, she served as his vice president, and so they're going to be able to go after her on the same things that they went after President Biden for. But of course, there are so many different dynamics in this race now, with it being Vice President Kamala Harris. And one of the biggest open questions, if she is in fact the nominee, is who her running mate's going to be, David.
Right now, I would assume, though, the Trump campaign is looking at the polling in the battlegrounds and still feel relatively reassured. Of course, on the Democratic side, they'd say, well, wait a minute, she hasn't even had a chance to make the case herself out there yet. But in many of those battlegrounds, she might perform in a couple of them a little stronger than President Biden is at this point. But she does trail Donald Trump in the vast majority of those battlegrounds as well, from the polling that we've seen publicly so far. She's got her work cut out for her. But again, it's the unknown for the Trump campaign.
It's the unknown, and that is what's so dangerous here, that they've been working for months and months to build this whole campaign, this whole operation against President Biden, and now they're trying to have to switch gears at this point. So yes, they're looking at some of the polling. Either way, David, this is such a close election, and now you have people really tuning in now that you have this major shakeup on the Democratic side.
Really a generational shift on the Democratic side, it would appear tonight. And again, as you heard me ask Mr. Wally there about this sudden shift with all the focus on President Biden's age, with him stepping out of the race. Donald Trump at 78, obviously, is the oldest candidate in this race now, moving forward. Rachel Scott with great reporting all afternoon. Rachel, we do appreciate it. As we have been reporting here, many Democratic leaders say President Biden's decision tonight will help energize the party. Will Vice President Kamala Harris prevail in this nomination process? Will she be challenged? These questions are still outstanding. But if she does get the nomination, with President Biden now fully behind her tonight, the question already, who will be her running mate? Here's our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl, going down the list tonight.
She doesn't have a single pledged delegate yet, but Vice President Kamala Harris is quickly emerging as the presumptive Democratic nominee. Even before Harris made it official that she would be running to replace Biden at the top of the ticket, she had locked up key endorsements, starting with Biden himself and former President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. Members of Congress quickly endorsing too.
It's in the interest of continuity, stability, and unity for the Democratic Party to clearly coalesce around Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee.
Including key figures in the House, the political arm of the Congressional Black Caucus, and Jim Clyburn, widely seen as the most important endorsement Biden himself received 4 years ago. And more than a dozen senators, some of the party's top donors too, many of them who had cut off support for Biden, have quickly come out to endorse Harris. But again, Kamala Harris doesn't have a single pledged delegate yet. Shortly after Biden bowed out, DNC Chairman Jamie Harrison declared that the party's process for picking his successor, quote, will be governed by established rules and procedures. It's unclear if there will be any major challenge to Harris, but attention is already turning to who she could choose as a running mate. Some of them potential contenders, including Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, Roy Cooper, governor of North Carolina, Phil Murphy, governor of New Jersey, Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky, governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. Also potentially on the list, Gretchen Whitmer from the battleground state of Michigan, who told George just days ago,
I think Michigan is always going to be a state that you can't take your eye off of. People in Michigan are good, hardworking people. We expect our leaders to be as good, if not better, and work just as hard, if not harder. And it's always going to be a close race.
John Karl back with me here tonight. John and I were side by side last week at the Republican convention. He was breaking news all week long, back with us on this major turn in the race for president tonight. And John, you know, you and I were talking, when you go down that list of potential running mates, and again, Kamala Harris still has to get the nomination officially. She says she's going to earn that. But if and when that happens, then she has to choose a running mate. There's going to be a lot of sort of calculations as to who might benefit her most. But one of the most telling things, obviously, about that list, Josh Shapiro, Pennsylvania, Roy Cooper, North Carolina, Mark Kelly, Arizona, Gretchen Whitmer at the end, and what she said to George in recent days, obviously from the very key battleground of Michigan. But John, I just wanted to read this to you because everyone's going to be reading the tea leaves. every hour, every day now, less than a month until the Democratic National Convention. Tonight, we've learned that Vice President Kamala Harris spoke with Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, someone whose name has come up with a possible vice presidential pick this afternoon. According to somebody familiar with the conversation, it's now been confirmed to ABC News. And again, she's also spoken with House Speaker, House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries, along with so many other Democratic leaders. But every conversation she has with somebody on this list of potential running mates, and of the names I just mentioned, obviously Josh Shapiro, right near the top of that list. First-term governor at the key battleground state of Pennsylvania, a state that either side is going to have to win if they want to win the White House.
Yeah, absolutely. And this shows this was one of the reasons why there was pressure on Biden not to run for re-election in the first place, because the party does have rising stars that happen to be sprinkled out in those key battleground states. Popular governors, not just governors, members of the president's cabinet, Gina Raimondo, Pete Buttigieg. I mean, there's a lot of talent in the Democratic Party ready to go out there. And I think it was also notable, David, in addition to that phone call you just mentioned with Josh Shapiro. And by the way, I'm going to say we haven't heard yet, but I bet you that we will learn that there were several phone calls today. Kamala Harris, I'm sure her phones were ringing, and she was getting calls from a lot of those people we just mentioned. But look at the people that endorsed her today. Josh Shapiro obviously endorsed her. You mentioned that. Also, Gavin Newsom, another name that had been mentioned. The governor of California endorsed Kamala Harris. Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, also thought as a potential rival to replace Biden, and perhaps a vice presidential contender as well. He endorsed Kamala Harris today. So I think you're going to see much more of this in the coming days. People reaching out to Kamala Harris, endorsing her, and perhaps positioning to remind her that they could be a quality running mate.
But rest assured, on the Democratic side, they are trying to figure out the formula that would give them the best shot, particularly where the numbers are right now in those key battlegrounds.
Yes, and it's not just the geographical balance, David. That's important, but we haven't really seen a running mate critical in winning an election by winning a state, arguably maybe not since John F. Kennedy chose LBJ and won the state of Texas. I mean, Barack Obama didn't win Delaware because Joe Biden was on the ticket. And Donald Trump didn't win the state of Indiana because he had Mike Pence as his running mate. A lot of it is, a balance perhaps ideologically. Kamala Harris is seen as from a little bit more of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, picking a moderate. Josh Shapiro is seen as a moderate. So is Roy Cooper, the governor of North Carolina. Both Democrats who have proven that they can win in states where Republicans are strong, where you need Republican and independent votes to win. And Lord knows, Kamala Harris is going to need some independent votes and perhaps a few of those anti-Trump Republican votes as well if she's going to win in November.
Obviously, a huge focus of Kamala Harris moving forward and who she would choose as a potential running mate, even as she publicly says she's got to win and earn this nomination first. You mentioned all those key endorsements. Many of them come from potential running mates, obviously. Also Democratic leaders, past and present. We've heard from former President Clinton tonight, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton throwing their support behind Kamala Harris. Interesting, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who very publicly put pressure on President Biden in recent weeks with very careful words, but we know how careful she is with them, but determined that they send a message in some way. And also former President Obama tonight, he's out with this statement about President Biden, did not endorse Kamala Harris, and we'll get to that in a moment, but he said, Joe Biden has been one of America's most consequential presidents, as well as a dear friend and partner. Today, we've also been reminded again that he's a patriot of the highest order. But John, you and I were talking earlier, not terribly surprising that the former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and former President Obama have not yet publicly endorsed Kamala Harris, given the fact that the voters and the delegates that they're sending to the convention need to bear witness to the vice president getting out there and fighting for this.
Yeah, they want to protect the process. They don't want to make it look as if Kamala Harris is simply being plucked by party leaders, anointed as the replacement for Joe Biden. But I also think that part of that was, and by the way, I don't think that they're not like they're secretly waiting for somebody else to get into the race. They will be with Kamala Harris. I have no doubt about that. But I think they also recognize this is Joe Biden's moment. He gave up something that you just don't see given up in politics. He was the presumptive Democratic nominee. He won 14 million votes through a series of primaries. This was his. He earned it. And to give that up, something that he had fought and dreamed about having his entire life, is huge. And so I think that both, certainly Nancy Pelosi understands that. She voluntarily gave up her position as the leader of the Democratic Party in the House. And, Barack Obama certainly wants his former vice president and the current president to have his day.
John Carl with us this hour as well. John, thank you. We'll come back to you if you have any new reporting. In the meantime, former governor, former presidential candidate Chris Christie from New Jersey with us tonight. Chris, always appreciate you joining us. First of all, what do you make of President Biden's decision?
Well, I think it was inevitable, David. I think he should have done it a year ago. And as the pressure came on, I think it's unfortunate, because if he had made this decision a year ago, he would have gone out clearly on his own terms. This now looks a little bit less than his own terms, given the pressure campaign that was orchestrated behind the scenes. But in the end, he gets credit for doing the right thing for the country. And I think him not being the candidate is the right thing for his party as well.
Let me ask you, you took on Donald Trump in the primary, 107 days until the election. Is that enough time for the Vice President, Kamala Harris, and whoever she chooses as a running mate, if she's officially the nominee in just a couple of weeks here, is that enough time to take on Donald Trump?
Look, this absolutely changes the race, David. I think anybody who says this doesn't change the race doesn't understand politics. But here's the big question. How does it change the race? And none of us know that yet. And the reason we don't is because that's going to depend almost exclusively on the performance of these two candidates now. How does Kamala Harris perform in the lead role? It's very different to be the person running for president than the person running for number two. And so she's going to be under a different level of scrutiny, a different level of pressure, and there's a different expectation level for her than there has been before. So how does she perform? And how does Donald Trump change his approach? He's now not running against 81-year-old Joe Biden. He's running against a much younger woman. And that's going to change the dynamic, too. Look, when I ran the first time for governor, David, I ran against an incumbent Democratic male. When I ran for re-election, I ran against a woman. And the pace of that race and the way you conduct yourself as a male candidate running against a female candidate has to have a bit of a different tone to it. The question for me is going to be, can Donald Trump adjust to that? And how will he react to this new dynamic? So we're going to see some very interesting developments over the course of the next number of weeks. But the one thing I know, I believe in my heart we're going to see is that Kamala Harris is going to be the nominee of the Democratic Party. And really the only suspense we're going to have over the next few weeks is going to be who does she pick as a vice presidential candidate. Otherwise, any talk of there being a competition for this is impractical, David. It's just no one else can mount the campaign she can mount. And I think we're seeing that already.
Governor Chris Christie, your point is well made when you say it changes the race. We simply don't know how it changes. Anyone who says they know doesn't know what they're talking about. But let me ask you, you talk about the intense scrutiny that she'll now face. Much different when you're potentially at the top of the ticket, which it looks like she is headed towards, and very, very quickly. Based on her performance as a prosecutor, as Attorney General, what you witnessed from her on the Senate Judiciary Committee with Supreme Court nominees, do you sense, Governor, that she potentially could be a formidable candidate for Donald Trump down the road here?
I really don't know, David, because all those things are so much different. As you know, I was a prosecutor for 7 years. I was the U.S. Attorney in New Jersey. When I got onto the stage as a statewide gubernatorial candidate, it was much different than what I had to do as a prosecutor. And while there were some skills that are transferable, there's a lot that are brand new to you. And so it's different. And then go from being a statewide candidate like she was for both Attorney General and United States Senator to being the national candidate for the Democratic Party, it's very unclear. The only indication we have of how she would perform was her primary race for president, which did not go well. Now, she's had 3.5 years since then to learn from that experience, or in fact, almost 4 years to learn from that experience. And we'll see whether the things that she's learned she can put into practice and be a better candidate. If she's the candidate, David, that she was in the 2019 to 2020 primary for president, Donald Trump's going to be the next president of the United States. If she's become a better candidate, then she can make the race much more competitive.
All right, we'll see in the weeks ahead. Governor Chris Christie, always great to have your insights. I appreciate it. When we come back here, more on the breaking news involving what this Democratic convention is going to look like. And one key lawmaker in Washington who's already signaled tonight, perhaps I will challenge Kamala Harris for the nomination. We'll get some reporting on that right after the break here.
They call him the beauty queen killer. He's targeting young women in malls.
I am single. I want to enjoy the company of a member of women.
He tortured me.
How did she survive 9 days of terror?
The word accomplice came up. Nobody knows the real story.
The Beauty Queen Killer, only on Hulu.
Hey, good morning, America.
Good morning, America.
Good morning, America.
Good morning, America.
Money. Are you ready? They are ready.
Covering the biggest events in the country right now.
There's a lot going on here this morning.
It's always a good time. That's what the show's about.
That's good. Really good. Very good.
Coming in hot. Jimmy coming in hot.
It's far from elementary.
Oh. Good morning, America.
I'm not going to try to strut like Michael or anything.
I have known George a long, long time.
Have you ever gotten him to dance? Look at that face.
You don't just see it, you feel it.
I'm in.
I'm in.
I'm in too. I'll be here.
I am here and so happy. I'm in. I'm in too.
I'm in.
That tells you something when Snoop Dogg's in. Michael, George, Lara, Ginger.
Why do so many people start their day here?
From ABC News, this is Start Here.
To be in the know and get a different take on the day's top stories. Start Here.
Now, that's a part of the story I bet you didn't see coming.
Make it your daily first listen, wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's go.
The ship is incredible. It feels like living in a science fiction movie.
We just saw what no one has seen before.
Wow, look at that.
Oh my gosh. We are heading into the unknown.
Hammer, hammer, hammer. It doesn't get any more cutting edge than this.
Nightline, the stories that shape your world, that shape your life. Dramatic, stunning, empowering, jaw-dropping. The most powerful stories of our time. Nightline, on right after Kimmel and streaming on Hulu.
All right, let the dogs out, please.
I don't think he's going to give you a hard time.
Even if he gives me a hard time, I'm the right guy.
You can handle it.
I want to make sure that we all learn together.
Calm, confident.
Calm, confident, calm, surrender.
Everything that he's taught has become a reality.
Yeah.
We are so grateful and impressed. I feel like crying. You changed our world.
It is a beautiful thing to see. As you rehabilitate the dog, you also rehabilitate you.
Welcome back. ABC News live coverage of this pivotal day in the race for the White House. We have learned, obviously, this Sunday, President Biden's dropping out of the race. He started with a letter on social media saying to my fellow Americans and then described why he is getting out of this race. He did end the letter to American voters by saying, remember, we are the United States of America. I want to bring in former head of the DNC, ABC News contributor Donna Brazile, back with us this hour. Donna, you broke the news last hour that Democrat turned independent Joe Manchin called you up this evening to ask you sort of what are the rules here to jump in and perhaps challenge Kamala Harris. Do you think he's going to move forward with that?
I don't know, David, but I am going to ensure that everyone who wants to jump in have a copy of Appendix E. This is the form that says that you are a Democrat. It is a form that you have to sign. and it has to be, of course, it has to be signed and notarized. So everyone, I mean, remember, the race to the nomination is open right now. Kamala Harris has been endorsed by President Joe Biden. She's working the phone. And I know because I just heard from a couple of my colleagues who are state party chairs, state delegation chairs, and they're signing forms to support Kamala Harris. So the clock is ticking. We know that this is going to have to be an expedited process. It's going to be fair and transparent. And of course, the current chair, along with the members of the Rules and Bylaws Committee and the DNC Convention Rules Committee, will issue all of the guidelines. But this process is moving. As they say in my old hometown, the train is leaving the station.
And very quickly, it would seem, have you spoken with Vice President Harris?
No, because I've gotten my assignments, and it's too. I can't talk to her and then get a call from the president of the Service Employees International Union, my union, and get a call from the National Education Association. I'm taking calls from the people who really matter. That's the delegates, the state party leaders, the state delegation leaders. But I'm also feeding to the vice president and her team that her support is solid. People are calling in. In fact, there's a huge call taking place, and the Zoom link got, somehow or another it got broken down, maybe like what happened with the airlines. There's so many people trying to call in right now to announce their support for Kamala Harris.
Donna Brazile, you have worked on presidential campaigns in years past, many of them. I want to ask you about the choice of a running mate. It very much looks like key members of the Democratic Party are coalescing behind Kamala Harris. So let's just go there. She's the top of the ticket. This is called the Harris campaign as of tonight. Mary Bruce reported that earlier. The vice president says, I still need to get out there and earn this nomination. That being said, if she is the nominee, you get on that list you heard from John Carl earlier, Josh Shapiro, Pennsylvania, Roy Cooper, North Carolina, Mark Kelly, Arizona, Gretchen Whitmer, Michigan. Would you pick anyone on that list to pair up with Kamala Harris?
Well, David, I have a lot of good names to recommend, but I know the vice president is going to get great advice, starting with advice from President Joe Biden. Joe Biden has led this party. She's able to pick up the phone and make calls tonight because, as you know, she campaigned across the country. She's been hitting the campaign trail hard. She's been raising money. She raised over $2 million yesterday in Massachusetts. So I'm confident that she will have the delegates, she will have the resources, and she will have the volunteers. If my phones, and I don't want to tell you how many phones I have, David, because I don't want you to get all my numbers, but if my phones are any indication, this is going to be a long night because I do believe tonight the excitement is there. People are so energized. They're praying for her. They know that she's a leader. They know that she's battle tested. And I just want to say to Governor Christie, you're right. We've never been here before. We've never been in a situation where we have a former president who didn't concede the election, 34 indictments, 34 convictions. We've never been here when the current president, in 68, when Mr. Johnson stepped down. But this is a different situation. So he has endorsed his vice president, and I'm sure that the Democratic Party will come together and unify behind Kamala Harris. But she has to work for it. She has to earn it. She promised she will, and if she's able to keep that commitment, she will earn this endorsement. This nomination.
This nomination. Let me ask you, because you know how this works. People are going to start reading the tea leaves. Every little detail that comes out, every hour, people are going to be hitting refresh on wherever their choice is to go for the latest political news. And of course, we hope it's ABC News. But you saw this readout earlier that reported that Vice President Harris spoke with Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, who we know is right near the top of the list of potential running mates. Very popular Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, battleground that they would need to win, the Democrats, if they want the White House back. Do you think he's a real contender here?
I hope so. I hope he's on the list. I hope Mark Kelly's on the list. I hope Roy Cooper's on the list. Look, there's so many strong Democratic leaders and perhaps some others that the vice president should give every consideration. She needs to have a strong ticket because the American people are expecting a strong Democratic ticket who are proven leaders who can lead this country from day one. She's been on the job for over 3.5 years, and I'm confident that she will make a great historic choice.
Donna Brazile with us. Breaking news here, as always, which is why we appreciate you coming on. Donna Brazile, our ABC News contributor, thank you. I want to bring in Martha Raddatz, our Chief Global Affairs correspondent. First, Martha, I wanted to get your reaction to Joe Manchin there, calling Donna Brazile and saying, now, how does this work? Can I get in this potentially to challenge Kamala Harris? She told us here on the air that she told Senator Manchin, well, first you got to become a Democrat again, with a little twinkle in her eye there live on the air when she said that. But you had Joe Manchin on this morning. I know you interviewed him. And it was a relatively moving interview about believing that this was the right thing for President Biden to do, to step aside. But was there any inkling during your interview that he might be considering challenging the vice president?
The simple answer is no, and what a difference 12 hours make. I asked him directly if he thought Joe Biden should step aside. He clearly wanted to announce that on television this morning, and he said, I come with a heavy heart to think the time has come for him to pass the torch to a new generation. I'm concerned about the president's health, his well-being. I really am. Again, he said, I think a new generation, it's time for a new generation to try to heal the party and heal the country. Joe Manchin will be 77 years old next month, so I don't know what he's talking about, a new generation, unless it's from 80-year-olds to 77-year-olds. But he gave no indication that he would consider doing that, and it's pretty clear that he is now interested in possibly getting into this nominating process. He did tell me he wanted an open convention. He thought that was the right way to go. But again, he kept saying it was with heavy heart. He thought Joe Biden should step aside. I did ask him about the mental acuity, whether he thought the president was okay to be president, given he didn't think he could be a candidate. He did say quite clearly that he thought Joe Biden was capable of finishing out this term.
Martha, let me ask you another generational question, and that is, it takes it back to President Biden, of course, 81 years old, making this obviously very difficult personal decision to get out of the race, a very rare decision, as we know, as we look back on history. It was just a couple of months back, I was in Normandy interviewing President Biden. As you know, he was there to mark the anniversary of D-Day with our World War II heroes in Normandy, who are, as you know, Martha, 99 years old, 100 years old, 101 years old. And he told me he'd been to the beaches of Normandy before, but that this moment he thought was more profound than his previous trip that he told me about, because of, and we've heard this from President Biden, about the inflection point that he thinks we're in as a country. And regardless of where people at home are on the political spectrum, this is just about President Biden, the human being. Decades of public service and what it must have been like to reach this decision. What reporting, and I know you have some from your sources, can you offer the viewers at home tonight about sort of where he is, what his frame of mind is in reaching this decision just this weekend, in just the last 24 hours?
Well, David, as you know, because we were reporting all week, that he truly wanted to stay in this race. He wasn't just saying that. His campaign wasn't just saying that. He was doubling down. He was lashing out at people who would suggest he would get out. But I think probably a key moment came when he came down with COVID and after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Because you think about that split screen with that fist raised in the air by Donald Trump and Joe Biden having a very difficult time walking up those stairs of Air Force One, walking down those stairs. But he also, a senior administration official told me, he does not believe he has any mental issues. He thinks he just doesn't have the energy to run the campaign. David?
And he's home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware tonight, recuperating from COVID and likely watching the coverage, not necessarily here, but the coverage of him in this historic decision tonight. So I appreciate your insight, Martha. I want to bring in our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, because, Pierre, it goes without saying, this vice president made history. President Biden's decision in selecting her made history as a running mate. They were then elected in 2020. And it looks very much like she will be the top of the ticket. We know it's officially now called the Harris campaign tonight. How does this change the state of play as far as history potentially being made here?
David, when you take a step back, if Kamala Harris becomes the Democratic nominee, she will be the first African-American woman, Indian-American woman, to run as a major party nominee. Just think about that. This country has never seen that before. It will raise issues of race and gender in a way that we've never seen before. And quite frankly, with Donald Trump being the candidate she's running against, he said some racially insensitive things at times. Also, she's a former prosecutor. He's been indicted, convicted. This is shaping up to be uncharted waters that we're in many times over, David.
Pierre Thomas with some perspective, some much-needed perspective tonight. Pierre, thank you. I know you're going to be tracking this right along with us in the coming days and weeks. I want to bring in Rick Klein, our political director, Washington bureau chief as well. And Rick, you and I have been talking about the polling. Obviously, Kamala Harris and some of these national polls shows a little more strength than President Biden in recent days nationally. The real test, though, is going to be in those key battlegrounds. One of the other more immediate tests, as you know, Rick, is sort of this endorsement game from key influential Democratic leaders and donors. And it would seem tonight as though, at least so far, many of those dominoes are falling into place.
David, this has been a political clinic by Kamala Harris and her team. They have locked down almost all of the major potential rivals, some of her biggest frenemies, even Gavin Newsom, Pete Buttigieg, real big players in Democratic politics, all moving along, almost all of the members of the so-called squad, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So the big left of the party is on board, a big chunk of the center. We've got governors and senators from red states as well. Other than the rumblings out of Joe Manchin, there is no serious threat that has emerged. And I would just say outright that she is even more likely to be the nominee than she was when we came on the air tonight. The train, as Donna Brazile said, has indeed left the station, and it's got Kamala Harris's name on it.
She did say that, and it appears to be the case tonight. Rick Klein, thanks so much. I want to get to presidential historian and ABC News contributor Mark Updegrove tonight, because, Mark, as we know, President Biden has said he will address the nation later this week to discuss in further detail how he came to this decision. And this is another sort of observation I think Americans made. And again, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, I think many Americans felt for him in that moment on that debate stage. Whether you support him or whether you don't, no one wants to see any sort of struggling to that level. Now, it would seem with this speech later this week, there is real opportunity, again, whether you support him or not, for reassurance for the American people, but also sort of a legacy-defining moment potentially for President Biden. How do you think he'll proceed?
Without question, you're right, David. I think Joe Biden saw as his legacy the preservation and the strengthening of democracy, particularly in the face of the challenges that we saw from Donald Trump. He wrested the presidency from Donald Trump in 2020, and he called the strengthening and preservation of democracy the central cause of his presidency. He returned us to democratic norms and traditions. He revived NATO around the liberation of Ukraine from Russian aggression. So much of his legacy is around that. And I think he saw that he wasn't the person to continue that quest, that he had to hand the torch over to the next generation. And the presumptive nominee, the obvious person, is Kamala Harris. This speech, I think, will show the American people that he is still has the mental acuity, still has the stamina to retain the role of president, and will also give him a chance to endorse his political heir, Kamala Harris, David. But we are certainly in very consequential times. We've heard that word consequence several times tonight. We are caught up in the currents of history, and we certainly see how consequential these times are, David.
We heard it almost universally from leaders on the Democratic side when it comes to former presidents, first ladies, secretaries of state. You heard it from former President Clinton, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, former President Obama, from former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the extraordinary role that Joe Biden played in 2020. You think this is an opportunity for him to define that moment in history with just a few seconds left?
I think there's no question. They said that he is a consequential president, David. He has been a consequential president who has enacted a very progressive and important agenda. Absolutely right. This speech is legacy defining in many respects, as was his not to accept his party's nomination.
Historian Mark Updegrove, always great to have you with us, Mark. Again, the big breaking story this Sunday, President Biden bowing out of the race for president. Stay with ABC News for continuing coverage of the race for president, a new chapter tonight. I'm David Muir.
It was the ideal.
whenever news breaks.
We are here in Israel, a nation at war.
In Rolling Fork, this tornado tore through this town.
From Lewiston, Maine.
The scene of a horrific mass shooting.
From the scene of that deadly missile strike.
ABC News Live everywhere.
In Iceland, let's go.
On the 2024 campaign trail.
Here at 10 Downing Street.
Wherever the story is.
We're going to take you there.
Your street.